Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Fire on the Mountain, an episode of The Transformers produced by Marvel Productions. I will start off by saying that this episode isn't a particular favourite of mine from the first season. Wait a minute, don't let that put you off the commentary, as I have many fond memories of the episode, and I can still remember the first time it aired on Whackaday during the school holidays, or was it on the Wide Awake Club? Usually I'm pretty good at recalling that kind of specific information, but I do recall presenter Timmy Mallet laughing and quoting Braun's dipstick tape deck line. We'll get there. Also, one of those early definitive memories for me was the appearance of this episode in the awesome Panini sticker album. Man, I obsessed over that sticker album. I still have my original complete one to this day, along with all the annoying scribbles that I made to the illustrations throughout. And so, a little bit of information about this particular episode. It was written on the 2nd of July 1984 by Douglas Booth. That name may be familiar to many of you who are fans of 1980s cartoons. Douglas Booth wrote numerous memorable episodes for many different cartoons that we all grew up with. Personally, for me, he's the guy that wrote Battle Cat far better than most, as seen in the Season 1 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe episode Valley of Power. Seriously, he gave Battle Cat such personality. Check out that episode because Battle Cat has some seriously wonderful dialogue. It's hilarious. This episode, Fire on the Mountain, had the script revised heavily by Ron Friedman on the 9th of July 1984. Now, I should stress the plot and the story beats are the same, but Friedman's job was to make the characters sound right, as in Braun reads like Braun, Trailbreaker reads like Trailbreaker, Starscream reads... you get the idea. As Douglas Booth wasn't a staff writer, he would not have known the voices, so to speak. I don't mean in a literal sense, it's just that there's a difference between reading a character description in a series Bible and writing actual dialogue, hence Friedman's rewrites. I'll highlight a few amusing pieces of dialogue during this commentary that Booth had in his script that probably would not have worked in an episode of The Transformers.
One Sky Spy coming up.
Actually, when you look at the revisions made by Ron Friedman, it's evident that this was not a guy phoning it in. He was doing his best in his role as dialogue editor, which is a very specific role, to ensure the quality of the Transformers, at least from a writing perspective. In years prior, those in charge could be accused of not caring too much about the end product. The 1979 Spider-Woman series, for example, which saw Jeffrey Scott seem not too fussed about inconsistencies and certain absurd elements found throughout the 13 episodes. You know what I love? Numerous cartoons of the 1980s that took place on Earth were rather educational, and I don't mean the obvious public service announcements and moral segments seen at the end of episodes. Let me explain. Growing up, my parents and I would primarily go on holiday within the UK to the many wonderful coastal towns, but watching shows like The Transformers, Mask, etc., you saw many enchanting and fascinating places all over the world. And I mean, here we are in Peru, the Andes Mountains. So whilst I was always fascinated by these giant robots fighting, the locations to me were just as intriguing.
You have done an excellent job. For now, the power of Earth's fiery core will serve the Decepticons.
There's a really great little dramatic moment coming up here as the Autobot Sky Spy is detected by the Decepticons, leading to Megatron blasting it out of existence. What I enjoy about the scene is the sheer power demonstrated by Megatron's latest weapon, channeling the energy of the Crystal of Power. Plus, aside from the visual spectacle, I love Spike's "what happened" line. It's like he's both shocked and in awe. Check it out. Yeah, that's great. The music on this show, so good. Also, this moment leads to the locals understandably believing that their ancient gods are on the warpath. And here we see for the first time Louisa, a truly lovely design and very inspired by the Japanese style of character design. Seriously, there are times during this episode where her eyes are beautifully big. It just adds to the exotic feel of her character. You know, when I think about the guest characters, the one-shot characters, it does make me think, when the movie happened, set in the year 2005, what had become of these characters? Were they still alive? What were they doing? I don't know, it's probably just me that wonders about that. This episode is probably best remembered for this wonderful and perfectly explored subplot in which Thundercracker pretty much can't stand Starscream or taking orders from him, which leads to numerous memorable scenes. And if I haven't mentioned it before, as a kid and even to this day, John Stevenson's Thundercracker voice is one of my favourites of the series. That low guttural register is just fantastic, and it's amazing that he was also able to raise his pitch so dramatically and voice a character like Beef Bonk in Galaxy High School. Okay, so where do we begin with this scene? Not only in the context of the episode, but just how it impacts the episode Fire in the Sky. For those unfamiliar with the series, in the episode Fire in the Sky, we are introduced to Skyfire, a former Cybertronian scientist who could transform into an awesome looking jet. Maybe they should have called him Jetfire. I jest. So, having been tricked by the Decepticons, particularly his former scientific ally Starscream, into fighting the Autobots, Skyfire soon learns the error in judgment he has made, and before the end of the episode, hooray, he's an Autobot, complete with insignia and all. However, in one of the most dramatic moments in a cartoon from the 1980s, in one final act to save the Earth, Skyfire sacrifices himself and is buried beneath an avalanche of ice. The episode ends with the Autobots mourning the death of Skyfire, with Optimus Prime leading the eulogy that they shall never forget him. It's a powerful and beautiful ending to an episode of the Transformers. And yet, Sideswipe and Wheeljack free Skyfire as if he had just had a little snooze. I would not mind Skyfire's return, but there's so little fanfare.
Wrong again, you dipstick tape deck.
And there's the dipstick tape deck line, a classic. But yeah, going back to Skyfire's return, neither Sideswipe or Wheeljack seem particularly over the moon to see their former dead ally, with Wheeljack immediately barking orders at Skyfire to head for Peru. You'd expect there to be an exchange, some sort of moment, even a few seconds in length, with the Autobots, any Autobot saying, "It's good to have you back, Skyfire." Maybe even a line like, "Sorry we underestimated your durability," rather than, "Hey, go to Peru." Also, and this is fairly common knowledge, the change in name from Jetfire to Skyfire was made after the recording sessions, and so, sometime later, any voice actor that uttered the name Jetfire, which was most, if not all, of the voice cast, had to return to the studio and, under the direction of Wally Burr, re-record their dialogue saying the name Skyfire instead.
Ouch! Hey, that's murder on my audio receptors. You're celebrating too soon, Bron.
That line from Megatron always kind of irks me. Megatron rarely refers to any Autobot by name, as if knowing them by name is beneath him. So hearing Megatron say Brawn's name, it feels slightly out of character. Think about it. "You're celebrating too soon, Autobot," would have been a far more appropriate line. Oh dear. And here we are in Act 2. Now, when I was a kid, I was fortunate enough to have quite a few Transformers toys. Not all of them, not even lots. But here, I loved recreating the scene with the figures, as I actually had Megatron, Soundwave, Jetfire, Brawn, and Windcharger. Okay, I didn't have Laserbeak, but I did have Buzzsaw. But yeah, this is a great action set piece. Very creative too, with the Autobots having to time their actions to perfection in order to escape and live to see another day. The countdown from Skyfire helps up the tension, and Windcharger's line, "I'm coming, Brawn, baby!" Love that. I guess now would be a good time to point out the fact that Douglas Booth had originally written a line with Brawn using the nickname Windy to describe Windcharger. Kind of glad they didn't go with that. That previous action scene, in the original script, all three Seekers, Starscream, Skywarp and Thundercracker, are present during the battle, having seen the confrontation taking place from the temple. It had a rather exciting additional action scene with Starscream and Skywarp firing heat-seeking missiles at Skyfire, who performs a loop-de-loop, resulting in the heat-seeking missiles soon striking Starscream and Skywarp, much to Thundercracker's amusement. And again, all of this dialogue was actually recorded, and these scenes were probably storyboarded too. And yes, Optimus Prime patting Skyfire is the closest we get to an emotional reunion. Ugh. It's so frustrating that more wasn't made of Skyfire's return from the dead. And for those that don't know, due to a legal issue over the Jetfire toy, that's a story unto itself, the character of Skyfire would slowly be phased out of the series completely, though he does make a little cameo from the back in an episode of the Japanese exclusive Headmasters series. I always loved Greg Berger as Skyfire. It's funny, he's often understandably so closely associated with Grimlock that it's easy to forget that he voiced this giant Autobot. We kind of get a return of the Skyfire voice in the Season 3 episode Grimlock's New Brain, as the Dinobot commander, now possessing great intelligence, speaks with a normal voice, and it's pretty much that of Skyfire. Here's an odd little anecdote. I once nearly met Greg Berger. No, not at a convention. So, as some of you may know, back in 2012, Laura Summer, the voice of Janine Melnitz in The Real Ghostbusters, invited me to a recording session of The Garfield Show, primarily so that I could actually meet Frank Welker and watch him perform, which was incredible. When I was outside chatting with Frank, I saw Greg Berger talking to a few other actors, and I so badly wanted to go over and shake his hand, but he was in conversation, and so I never really got the chance to meet him. And for some reason, I'm not quite sure why, Louisa is no longer at the village and is now present at the factory under attack from the Decepticons. Okay.
Hang on, kids, it's not over yet.
Before I forget, there's an amusing scene in the script that was sadly removed from the episode. In the scene, Reflector uses his powers to blind Ironhide and Wheeljack. The pair, unable to see, end up beating the crap out of a random machine in the factory, and when their vision returns, Ironhide says to Wheeljack, "I told you that didn't feel like a Decepticon." Peter Cullen's delivery of the line is great, which reminds me to give a big shout out to the truly wonderful archivists, Transformers at the Moon. This part of the episode always puzzles me to a degree. We see that Megatron is indestructible due to coating himself in the alloy they have obtained from the factory, but you would think that this would be the major plot point of the episode. Yes, the alloy they have obtained from the factory is to better harness the Crystal of Power's power, but surely the Decepticons possessing the ability to make themselves indestructible, even if only temporarily, would be a major plot point, but it's kind of forgotten about after this scene. And as this episode reaches its conclusion, you'll realise that the Decepticons really could have done with being indestructible.
Yeah, but even without our new weapon, I can fry your circuits extra crispy.
And here we go with this wonderful Thundercracker subplot. Let's listen to a bit of his speech.
On the other hand, if I let you wreck our new weapon, Megatron might blame Starscream, which would make me very happy. Thundercracker, you putrid traitor!
love that line from Starscream. Thundercracker, you putrid traitor! Again, the script contains more of Thundercracker's dissension. It's such a shame that this aspect of his character wasn't an ongoing thing, because it adds not only more to Thundercracker, but also creates that uneasiness in the ranks of the Decepticons. Starscream trying to overthrow Megatron, and also Thundercracker trying to overthrow Starscream. Of course, come the movie, Starscream would have the last laugh, as both Megatron and Thundercracker were severely injured and left for dead, until Unicron. As the Decepticons leave, look at the shot of Optimus Prime, Ironhide and Jazz. Look at that, great poses and energy. And Megatron decides to cause an avalanche in order to aid their escape. I'm sure this was a trope of numerous cartoons of the 1980s. Divert the attention of the heroes and flee. That previously detailed shot of the villagers looking up at the avalanche, if you look at the style, the characters look very much like extras in an episode of Battle of the Planets, or Science Ninja Team Gatchaman if you prefer. And the Autobots stop the avalanche with firepower. I'm not entirely sure that is a solution, but the firepower, drama and animation convince me otherwise. This shot of Starscream and Thundercracker carrying Skyfire, Rhino's wonderful remastering saw an error appear, Skyfire painted as Skywarp, so you can imagine how jarring a visual that is now that that is currently the official version. Ugh.
Far more valuable than the two of you.
I so hope that years from now someone is able to get to an official level and restore the episodes properly. Interestingly, there's a scene here removed from the episode, and again recorded, in which Optimus Prime informs his fellow Autobots that, according to Spike, Skyfire has been hurt. If this scene had made it into production, I would love to have heard an ad-libbed line from an Autobot from the back of the convoy saying, "Hey, wasn't he already dead?"
Smelters.
The Ancient Ones knew many things.
Spike's about to use his skills to fix Skyfire, which isn't all that much of a jump as we see Sparkplug fix an Autobot or two in the first season.
Just what we need! A visiting Decepticon!
There's a wonderful close-up of Louisa that may be the most anime looking of all, with her eyes illustrated so wonderfully large.
Baby, careful!
Such a lovely illustration too. Actually, that reminds me, one thing I want to highlight about this episode are the visuals. And yes, it's often easy to do that with this series due to the fantastic work of Japanese studio Toei Doga, as well as the numerous other studios in Japan that they themselves would outsource to. And yeah, it's also rather easy to talk about the visuals when ACOM were in charge of an animation production, but in a less than complimentary way. But Fire on the Mountain is a prime example of how the visuals of the show would pretty much look throughout the lengthy second season of the Transformers. The use of shading, the box-like aesthetics, the extreme close-ups, the timing across many sequences, as well as the way in which the humans are illustrated, all of those elements are present in this episode. So yeah, the conclusion of this episode sees Megatron atop the temple with his weapon powered by the Crystal of Power. And going back to what I said before, it seems like an odd conclusion to his plan. Does Megatron intend to spend the rest of his life zapping anyone that comes near? Not exactly world conquest, is it? As I mentioned, we get a hint of a far more impressive finale when Megatron revealed that the alloy makes him impervious to attack. That should be the finale. This feels like Donkey Kong. Ascend the tower and defeat the baddie. That said, the staging of the finale is good. I just wish I knew what Megatron's master plan was. Wait, no, that was another episode entirely. And hurrah, Skyfire awakens just in time. Another thing that Rhino botched during their remastering process, the audio during the final battle is mixed so badly to accommodate that wonderful 5.1 mix that no one asked for, that it's near impossible to hear the dialogue. Like, seriously, it's so bad that key pieces of exposition are lost, buried behind laser fire and music. One thing that I have yet to talk about, I do love the partnership of Brawn and Windcharger. Those two mini Autobots were two of my favourites growing up, so seeing them together in this episode in many a scene is great. Actually, thinking about it, the UK Transformers comic featured these two in their own stories very early on. One saw Windcharger team up with Ravage in order to overcome the security of the Ark itself, and a far more famous story, The Enemy Within, saw Brawn defect from the Autobots and eventually fight Starscream. Sad to think that, come the movie, both Brawn and Windcharger would be dead. Oh, during this battle, be sure to look out for something really quite odd. I only noticed it when making notes for this commentary. Reflector is firing at the Autobots using Shockwave. How crazy is that? I guess no crazier than Shockwave firing at the Autobots in one episode using himself. And there goes Ironhide, saved by Prime. I'm always astounded at how Peter Cullen was able to voice two characters that had a similar low register and still make them sound different. What a talent. And here the battle reaches its conclusion with Optimus Prime lifting Megatron over his head and throwing him down. As I said, Megatron's plan really does seem to have been quite simple. You should have covered yourself and your allies in that alloy, Megatron. Instead, Megatron and his Decepticons flee, and we get an odd comedy moment here with Thundercracker mocking Megatron and Starscream, and Starscream complaining that he has a headache. It feels more like an ending to an episode of He-Man and She-Ra than the Transformers. Whilst the show had comedy, I just feel that it doesn't work with the Decepticons in this particular episode.
And they call themselves Decepticons. I shall be avenged, Autobots.
And the Autobots are victorious, and no Skyfires were killed temporarily in the making of this episode. That said, the episode isn't over yet. He could still die. Skyfire, the Autobot that only Hasbro could kill.
Inventions you never can tell.
Okay, Skyfire, let's cap this energy gusher.
Wheeljack, you did it.
It's kind of a sweet ending with the Autobots illuminating the top of the temple so that Wheeljack and Skyfire can shake hands. A nice visual and set piece. There's an odd little exchange here with Spike and Louisa nervously asking for a ride back into town. Even reading the script makes me question why it's present. As for Louisa, sadly she never appears in the series again. I think bringing her back post-movie would have been rather fascinating, taking the Autobots and Decepticons back to Peru, but as we know, the post-movie episodes seem to avoid Earth-based adventures as much as possible. And here, Louisa tells us that her brother's car, a convertible no less, is called Juanita and would get along with Bumblebee just fine. I'm guessing out there somewhere is a really, really bad fanfic exploring this relationship between Bumblebee and Juanita. That sends shivers down my spine. As I said at the start, not one of my favourites from the first season, so my enjoyment of this episode definitely stems from my memories of watching it or looking at it in the pages of the sticker album. But I love recording commentaries for episodes of the Transformers, even when the episodes may not be my cup of tea. And that's the end of this episode commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.